Okay. Alhamdulillah. Welcome everyone to our part 4 of Surah Al-Mulk, Journey through the Qur'an. Inshallah, we'll start with dua. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير وابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise is due to God, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his family and companions and followers. We intend to learn and to teach, to remind and be reminded, to benefit and be benefited, to improve and be improved, to encourage holding fast to the book of God and the way of his messenger, to call to guidance and to direct towards good, hoping for the countenance of God and his pleasure and his proximity and his reward. And peace and blessings of Allah be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family and companions and followers. Ameen. So thank you everyone for joining. And inshallah, we're going to get started actually first with what we normally do is we ask about the homework from the previous week. So I want to ask for those of you who did the assignment, well, I should ask how many of you were able to do the assignment. You can do it by show of hands. And one of the ways to know if people have done it is if they remember what it is. So can anyone put in the chat box what was the assignment from last week? And I'll give you a little clue. One of our volunteers and attendees of this program actually made something and put it on Facebook regarding the assignment. Made like a little sign that we could use. So that should give it away. To try to speak well or not at all, and to ask ourselves, is it necessary? Is it kind? Is it truthful? Yep. Yes, to speak well or keep silent. And by show of hands, if you want, you can raise your hand. Did anyone remember it this week? Did anyone try? Did anyone put it somewhere for themselves? And you can answer privately as well. You don't have to post it for everyone. If you want to send me something anonymously, I can talk about it. If anyone has any reflections. So okay, Hamda, thank you. Thank you for the person who raised their hand. Barakallahu fiki. And alhamdulillah, we have a contribution. I mentally tried but didn't post it. It was helpful. I couldn't remember the true, but the other two were very helpful in text and speech. And someone else mentioned that they tried to do this for a few days and then forgot. And then alhamdulillah, there's a private contribution that they had to think twice. They actually had to think twice before speaking. And subhanAllah, just, in terms of striving for the best speech, one of the things, even if it's like a person's not about to say something bad, but just striving to better our speech in general, one of the things that I personally took from this assignment that we did together is just realizing that we have more control than we think we do if we make an intention. So you're in a conversation, and when you have the intention to speak well or keep silent, you realize your speech is not in charge of you, you are in charge of your speech. You realize you don't need to always fill in the silence. Sometimes silence is a good thing. You don't to be comfortable in not saying as much, or to say less. And sometimes actually in conversation, what I noticed is if there's many people, like on a call or a conference call, if I have an idea, if I actually hold it in for a few minutes, someone else will actually say it, right? Someone else will say the same thing. So it doesn't necessarily have to come from me. Truth can be, or something good or something beneficial or whatever it is, can come from someone else. And again, all of these things help us because so much of the way we interact in this society, or we're encouraged to interact in this society, is we are encouraged to be mindless. We are encouraged to be without uh, without thought or reflection, or even inhibition, right? For someone to have quote unquote inhibited speech is not necessarily regarded in a good way. Yeah, say what you want to say, you do you, right? It's kind of like saying, let your ego do your ego, let your nafs be your nafs, right? That's what some of this messaging does. And so, alhamdulillah, with these practices, I think one of the things to take from them really is just that intention is everything. You set an intention. I shouldn't say it's everything, but it is a lot. And as soon as you make an intention and you commit to it, you find following it out is so much easier than the very first part of it, which is just to make the intention, to renew the intention. If you make the intention, renew the intention, the rest is so much easier. So this is one of the intentions we want to renew regularly: to speak well or keep silent, to speak well or keep silent. This one is not just for this week, but it's, inshallah, it's a life habit, something, a reminder to have with us always. And now, inshallah, we will go to the assignment. Let me share my screen. Okay, that's not working. Just a moment, everybody. Try that again. All right, everyone can see this, inshallah. Surah Al-Mulk. Today we're going to go through verses 15 through 18. And again, we talked about how this is a surah that we want to review and try to memorize. If you haven't started memorizing it as we're doing it, it's not too late. It will take us a few weeks still more to finish. So we are going slowly through the tafsir. This gives us all a chance to do some review. If we haven't reviewed thus far, we can actually start now and still finish rememorizing it, or memorizing it even for the first time by the time we finish, inshallah, the tafsir. So you can make that intention. We can make that intention together. Now, we always like to start with the ishara of Imam Ibn Ajiba of the previous verses before we start the next verses. And so in the ishara, it was actually quite short this time. And the ishara was for the verses 12 through 15. إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير وأسروا قولكم أو اجهروا به إنه عليم بذات الصدور ألا يعلم من خلق وهو اللطيف الخبير. These are the verses. Truly, for those who fear their Lord unseen, there shall be forgiveness and a great reward. Keep your speech secret or proclaim it. Truly, he knows what lies within hearts or within breasts. Does he who created not know? He is the subtle, the aware. He mentions that those who have true khashya of Allah, they are watchful of him. And the word that he used in his commentary was the same word that when you say muraqaba. We've talked about that concept before. To watch over ourselves is muraqaba, but this is someone who is watchful of their Lord, meaning that they are watchful over themselves in their Lord's presence, and also watchful of their Lord in their own lives. What do we mean? So someone who is watchful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is witnessing regularly what Allah does with them. You know, they wake up in the day and they don't say, what am I going to do? But they say, what is Allah going to do with me today? And so they have this quality of being watchful with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it does indicate a watchfulness over their own behavior, but it's more focused, it's less focused on themselves and more focused on, their response to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says that they are people, those who truly have khashya of Allah, they worship Him and they continue to worship Him until they know Him. It doesn't mean that once they know Him, they stop worshiping. It means that they are striving in their worship to draw closer and closer and closer to God until they have ma'rifah, right? This spiritual knowledge. And so a person who has this, Ibn Ajiba describes that for them, the unseen becomes like the seen. It doesn't mean the unseen becomes seen, but the unseen becomes like the seen, right? Their belief in what they don't see is as strong or in similar strength as what they do see. And so Imam al-Wartaji also, he talks about this and he says, Allah describes the ma'rifah of the arifin. He describes the knowing of God from the arifin, from the knowers or the Gnostics of Him before He mentions their witnessing Him or seeing Him. So it's because of their khashya. And he says this khashya is something that exists also in a place that's unseen, which is within their hearts. And it allows all this. There's more commentary, but as it related to our tafsir that we covered, that's what I wanted to highlight. And also he mentions just some comments of Imam al-Ghazali, Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali radiallahu anhu, that Al-Latif is the one, similar, we covered this in the tafsir, but he also, Imam Ghazali says the same things, essentially, that Al-Latif is one who has qualities of kindness, gentleness, and is aware of the tiniest of subtleties. And not just aware, but he is subtle himself, and he is aware of those subtleties. Then Al-Khabir is the one who knows and is aware of the inner or hidden aspects of all things as well as their outward. And so these were mentioned in the commentary that we covered, but they're also mentioned in the Ishara afterwards. And today we will go through verses 15, inshallah, through 18. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكلوا من رزقه وإليه النشور أأمنتم من في السماء أن يخسف بكم الأرض فإذا هي تمور أم أمنتم من في السماء أن يرسل عليكم حاصبا فستعلمون كيف نذير ولقد كذب الذين من قبلهم فكيف كان نكير. He is the one who made the earth tractable for you, so travel the open roads thereof and eat of his provision. And unto him is the resurrection. Do you feel secure that he who is in heaven will not cause the earth to engulf you while it churns? Or do you feel secure that he who is in heaven will not unleash a torrent of stones upon you? Soon shall you know how my warning is. And indeed those before them denied. How then was the change I wrought? We'll go back to verse 15. Now, interestingly, this section of the verses starts with something that when we look at it, it's the beginning of it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminding others and the audience that is being spoken to here of his favor upon them, his favor upon us, all of us, but his favor upon them. And then the verses seem to focus on those who specifically are in denial of the truth, right? But at the very outset, the reminder is actually endearing. at the very outset, the reminder is of a blessing that God has given to all of us and has given even to the category of people he's speaking to later. هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكلوا من رزقه وإليه النشور. He is the one who made the earth tractable for you, so travel the open roads thereof and eat of his provision, and unto him is the resurrection. Now, the word dhalula here, it means layina. Ibn Ajiba mentions that it is the roads or the pathways of the earth are made soft, easy, and smooth, and this makes it so that it's easy for someone to tread upon the earth, to cross it, to travel, and to walk specifically across it. Famshu fi manakibiha. In manakib, the roads, it means it's the jawanib, like the different sides or places within the earth. And also there's another way that we look at this, or another indication that Allah here is mentioning his favor as a way to draw in the listener in a positive way. What do I mean by that? In Arabic, it could have been, and the sentence can be like linguistically structured slightly differently. It could be said, for example, linguistically it's correct and more common for it to say, هو الذي جعل الأرض ذلولا لكم. He is the one who made the earth tractable for you, right? And that's the way it's been translated, because it's for ease of translation. But what it actually says is he is the one who made for you the earth tractable. And so now the emphasis is on for you. And Ibn Ajiba radiallahu anhu, he says this is lihtimam wa tashwiq. Like, this is to show the importance of this was done for you, the importance of it. And also tashwiq is like encouragement or drawing that person in, right? So he is the one who made for us, or for you, the earth easy to tread, or smooth to tread, and for us to walk across and to travel. There's also a subtlety here in meaning. And that is that there's an encouragement to travel, which happens many times in the Qur'an. But in this particular instance, there's this idea of travel and eat from the sustenance that God has given us. So enjoy what God has bestowed upon us and blessed us with, but also that one of the purposes of traveling, right, and finding a place to stay is finding a place to live and stay where the sustenance is sufficient for our survival, right? And so, scholars have talked about this, and they've said, like, one of the ways that a person knows they've been given, divine permission to leave, let's say, the place that they're in, is that they don't have, they can't sustain themselves in that land, like in terms of risk. Maybe they cannot find a job. Maybe there's no jobs. Maybe all the food has been destroyed, and so they need to live, and they need to be able to eat. And so they are in those situations. It's like they've been given divine permission to get up and travel to another land, because that is what we're supposed to be able to take from whatever land we reside in, is to be able to have the sustenance to survive. So there's a subtlety in that as well. Now, the beginning of this verse is similar to Surah Nuh. And in Surah Nuh, verses 19 and 20, the translation is, "And God made the earth an open expanse for you, that you may travel spacious paths therein." And we've this idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala making the world an expanse, and the word that's used is mahda, almost like a cradle, but also wide. And that's repeated in the Qur'an in different places. The command to travel or journey on the earth and to reflect upon the nature of the created order is also something that occurs many times in the Qur'an. And it's usually mentioned in relation to the temporal life, or the transient life, the life of this world. So this, in this particular verse, there is the reminder as well. You travel the world, you enjoy what you enjoy from it. وَإِلَيْهِ النُّشُورِ. And in the end of that, unto him is the resurrection. What does that indicate? Go through the earth, right? He's made, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the earth for us dhalulan, right? Like soft and or smooth and easy to tread. And then that we take from the sustenance of that is being provided for us in the earth by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then we are returning to him, and with him is the resurrection. So Ibn Ajiba, he mentions that this clause, وَإِلَيْهِ النُّشُورِ, it indicates that at the end of everything, we will be asked about that sustenance. Yes, we enjoy. Yes, we walk through the earth and we travel, but we will be asked about that sustenance. Were we grateful for those blessings? Were we grateful? Right? This idea that we will be resurrected after our rizq, how did we spend our rizq? Were we grateful for the rizq that we were given? It's also this idea of traveling through the world is mentioned in the Qur'an, also in relation to understanding the nature of the creative power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah Al-Ankabut, it's mentioned, journey upon the earth and observe how he, Allah, originated creation. Then God shall bring the next Genesis, an-nash'at al-akhirah, right? The latter creation into being. Truly God is powerful over all things. And so this idea of traveling through the world and looking upon this creation, noticing how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created this world, and that being an indication of what will be created in the next world. There's also an exhortation to travel or journey and to reflect and to contemplate so that the heart can become open to truth. In Surah Al-Hajj, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse 46, have they not journeyed upon the earth that they might have hearts by which to understand or ears by which to hear? Truly, it is not the eyes that go blind, but it is hearts within breasts that go blind. And so there's so many verses that actually talk about traveling. And maybe that could be another like day or something. We could look at all of the verses that talk about traveling through the world. And that, in what ways is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the verses calling us to attention, to reflect and to think, and to gain lessons from that experience. Today, oftentimes when people are traveling, right? When do people travel? They travel to go on vacation. They travel to not reflect. They travel so that they don't have to think. They travel to get away from everything and to escape. Holidays, yeah. People travel during holidays. People travel when they get tired of staying home. But the idea of traveling for the purpose of opening one's heart to truth, reflecting, right? This idea of being a spiritual traveler, right? I am seeking God in my travels. I am seeking to open my heart in my travels and to reflect. There's a number of different verses that point to traveling, but one of them, a number of them actually talk about traveling and looking upon the ruins of those who came before them. So in Surah Rum, أَوَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَيَنْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. Do they not travel through the earth and then see how we dealt with those that came before them, right? And this is dealing with punishments of previous nations. So this is important. This is significant. It's related to the next verses, that because when people travel through the world, they yes, there is a risk to take. There is a reflection on the creative power of God to make everything that we see in the world. And if he can make this world the way it is, then everything that he has told us about the next life of course, the one who made this is more than powerful to make the next, right? And so these are all indications. But there's also this idea of traveling through the world and looking at the punishments of those that came before. And I think that those verses in the Quran that specifically talk about aqibatul ladina min qablihim, right? What happened to those who came before, they're really important. Yeah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Ankabut, and we destroyed Qarun and Fir'aun and Haman, and certainly Musa came to them with clear arguments, but they behaved haughtily in the land, yet they could not outstrip us. Okay, so one, Musa alayhi salam came to them. Who's them? Qarun and Fir'aun and Haman, and they are different oppressors, right? All of these are three names that we automatically associate with wealth, you know, power, and oppression. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the next verse, or the translation of it, so each we punished for his sin. Of them was he on whom we sent down a violent storm, and of them was he whom the rumbling overtook, and of them was he whom we made to be swallowed up by the earth, and of them was he whom we drowned. And it did not beseem Allah that he should be unjust to them, but they were unjust to their own souls. So there are, the verse before this, deals with, or I shouldn't say the verse before this, but what I mentioned before, it's in terms of traveling through the world to see what the aqiba is of those who came before. You can go to Egypt. Well, we can't travel right now because of COVID-19, but before, when we could travel to Egypt, and you could see the pyramids, right? You could see how huge they are. And you can see the ruins, and they have the Egyptian museum, and you can see all of the wealth that the people of Pharaoh, or the different pharaohs, I should say, had. And yet this was a civilization that was, one of their civilizations was destroyed in the time of Musa alayhi salam, one who had all of this wealth and all of this power. And we see the pyramids and we see these ruins, and yet, Pharaoh and his armies, we know, were drowned. So this is important as we look at the next verses. And it's an intention. One of the intentions we should have when we travel is to reflect on what we see in order to draw us closer to God. To look, the scholars, they talk about Kitabullahi al-Maqru', the book of God that we read. And they also talk about Kitabullahi al-Manzur, that the book of God that we witness with our eyes, that we are reading the signs of God in the world around us. So when we travel, this is a really good time for us to reflect on God's signs and to look at things with this eye of reflection in particular. And I don't know, I might be speaking for myself, I don't know, but others, but how many times, even as I'm not talking about going for Umrah, I'm not talking about traveling for Hajj, but how many times have, when you boarded a plane to travel, that in travel itself, you feel closer to God, right? In travel itself, if you've ever traveled by yourself or even with others, but in the act of traveling, there is this closeness that I don't know how to describe it, but you are with God in your travels. I remember a teacher once said that whenever they travel alone, something they end up doing that more than any other time is they'll actually end up reciting so much more Qur'an during their travels. And so they never feel alone because they have the Qur'an with them, and they have more of the Qur'an with them because they're actually reciting more Qur'an when they travel. Or looking out the window and making dhikr, if you're sitting on a plane. But yeah, so this idea of traveling and reflecting on the signs of God around us. And then the 16th verse, أَأَمِنْتُم مَّن فِي السَّمَاءِ أَن يَخْسِفَ بِكُمُ الْأَرْضَ فَإِذَا هِيَ تَمُورُ. Do you feel secure that he who is in heaven will not cause the earth to engulf you while it churns? Now here the tone changes a lot, or it seems to change a lot, right? The first verse is talking about how Allah for us has made the earth so easy to tread so that we can enjoy from the sustenance he's provided, and that of course we will be resurrected and he will ask us about it. And then this next verse is about this idea of it, the way the question is posed. It's rebuking someone who actually does this, because there are people who live in this world and they feel secure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not cause the earth to engulf them while it's interesting, while it churns, while it's turning. And oppressors are like this. This is the oppressor feels that they can do whatever it is they want and they will get away with it. They can harm people. They can hoard wealth, and there's a connection between one who hoards wealth, right, and one who oppresses and takes the rights of others. Being rich is not wrong in Islam, but one who sets out to hoard wealth will often find themselves harming other people. And actually, even in Islamic economics, money is supposed to be in circulation. It's not supposed to be hoarded. That's the ethics of our economics is against hoarding wealth. You can invest wealth, you can save wealth, you can put it in a trust. There's ways of dealing with wealth that are encouraged, but hoarding wealth is not one of them. And it's not economically beneficial for a land that we live in, and it's not even individually beneficial either. So why do I mention this? Do you feel secure that he who is in heaven will not cause the earth to engulf you while it churns? Because of the verses I just mentioned about Qarun, right? And Fir'aun and Haman. Did not the ocean swallow Pharaoh, who hoarded wealth and who oppressed the people? And did not Pharaoh think that he was untouchable, right? All oppressors have a God complex. Qarun, right? In apparently in the study Qur'an, the word that's used for Qarun is Korah. And at first I was like, who's Korah? I thought it was like the second Avatar from I don't know if anyone knows the Avatar series, Legend of Korra. I was like, oh my God, is Korra someone I didn't hear about? Is Korra being mentioned in the Quran? But it's Qarun, who we do know about. And he was someone who also hoarded wealth. And he did not, he was someone who oppressed people. And so here, the way the question is posed is again, similar to Surah Al-Nahl. Do those who have plotted evil deeds feel secure that God will not cause the earth to engulf them, or that the punishment will not come upon them while they are not aware? In Surah Al-Qasas, the story of Qarun is mentioned. Let's see. I'm actually going to open it and look at it for you guys right now. It's Surah Al-Qasas, which is Surah number 28, verses 76 through 82. Surely Qarun was of the people of Musa, but he rebelled against them, and we had given him of the treasures, so much so that his hoards of wealth would certainly weigh down a company of men possessed of great strength. When his people said to him, do not exult, surely Allah does not love the exultant, and seek by means of what Allah has given you the future abode, and do not neglect your portion of this world, and do good to others as Allah has done good to you, and do not seek to make mischief in the land, surely Allah does not love the mischief makers. He said, I have been given this only on account of the knowledge I have. And this is something that's really interesting is repeated in the Quran. Wealthy people attributing their wealth to how smart they are. I am rich because I was smart, and you are poor because you weren't smart. The the point is that this is subhanAllah not something, this is the attitude of the one who attributes the good to themselves and does not attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the attitude of someone who will then oppress other people because they believe it's because of me, right? This is my right. They don't say this is a blessing that God has given them. They see this as their right because they were smart. Does it sound, I'm not going to say anything, but does it sound like any of our political candidates tonight that are running for office? Did he not know that Allah had destroyed before him of the generations those who were mightier in strength than he and greater in assemblage, and the guilty shall not be asked about their faults? So he went forth to his people in his finery. Those who desired this world's life said, "Oh, would that we had the like of what Qarun is given. Most surely he is possessed of mighty good fortune." And those who were given the knowledge said, "Woe to you! Allah's reward is better for him who believes and does good, and none is made to receive this except the patient. Thus we made the earth to swallow him up and his abode." And it says in Arabic, فَخَسَفْنَا بِهِ وَبِدَارِهِ الْأَرْض. So we made the earth to swallow him up and his abode, so he had no body of helpers to assist him against Allah, nor was he of those who can defend themselves. And those who yearned for his place only the day before began to say, "Ah, know that Allah amplifies and straightens the means of subsistence for whom he pleases of his servants. Had not Allah been gracious to us, he would most surely have abased us. Ah, know that the ungrateful are never successful." And so here we have verses that talk about someone who was actually swallowed up by the earth. He was swallowed up with his wealth and his home, and everything was swallowed up. So when we go back to the surah, أَأَمِنْتُم مَّن فِي السَّمَاءِ أَن يَخْسِفَ بِكُمُ الْأَرْضَ. Do you feel secure that he who is in heaven will not cause the earth to engulf you, right? This sentence, and the way that the sentence is, or this question is posed, it's posed to those who reject the truth. And it's posed to those who hoard wealth, have power, and oppress people. It's a particular kind of people that get swallowed up by the earth in the Qur'an, right? And the tafsir mentions that that in it there's a reminder in the verse for the story of Qarun, who possessed great wealth but was nonetheless engulfed by the earth as a punishment for oppressing people. Now, I want to go back. There's something that's interesting that's mentioned in this verse, and it's going to be mentioned in the next verse. أَمْ أَمِنْتُم مَّن فِي السَّمَاءِ أَن يُرْسِلَ عَلَيْكُمْ حَاصِبًا فَسَتَعْلَمُونَ كَيْفَ النَّذِيرُ. Or do you feel secure that he who is in heaven will not unleash a torrent, which is like a wind of stones upon you? Soon shall you know how my warning is. What's mentioned in verse 17 and verse 16 is this clause, "Men fis sama," one who is in heaven. And here it's really important to emphasize, "Men fis sama" is translated "he who is in heaven," but the commentary Ibn Ajiba mentions, he really emphasizes this in his commentary, that one should not take this clause within the verse to mean to think that it's referring to sama ad-dunya, the skies of the earth, or even that it has anything to do with the sab'a samawat, the seven skies. And there's one opinion that mentions that the reason that the sama is mentioned is that this is the manzil of the place where the decree of God comes down. So it's the place of his qada. It's the place where revelation descends from. It's the place where the angels come down with God's commandments and his prohibitions. And basically all that occurs on earth, it is decreed. What is decreed by it is in the heavens, right? And so that's what's being mentioned. That's that place. where the qada of Allah comes down from. That being said, Imam al-Lajja'i, he says that linguistically in Arabic, the word sama can also, it doesn't just mean sky. It can mean anything that is, all that is above, everything that is above. So it can mean, the word as-sama can also mean al-ulu, which is like the highness. So a way that this verse can, to understand the meaning, because it's not referring to the skies of this world, and it's not referring to the seven skies, sab'a samawat that's mentioned in the Qur'an, is to look at this and to say that this verse is, its meaning is the one who is in the highness, right? The one who is man fil ulu, one who is above all else. And one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Ali, right? Which is the Most High. And so this is, he says that this refers to the highness of his majesty, of his jalal. And so it's not, so don't think about it in terms of, again, the skies of this world. Think about it in terms of one who is in the highness, al-ulu, or in the highest of places. I mean, I shouldn't say places, who is in the highest rank, or I don't even want to say rank because that, we don't want to use those terms. But above all else, greater than all else. So then, do you feel secure that one who is above all else and greater than all else cannot, not just will not, but cannot cause the earth to engulf you while it churns? This idea that, don't you realize that you're not in charge? Don't you realize that the one who is powerful over all, right? He is the one who owns the mulk and the malakut, right? He owns the kingdom. Cannot cause, how easy it is for him to cause what he already owns, right? This earth that he already owns, and that's under his dominion, it's under his authority, for it to just swallow you up. How do you feel secure? How do you feel so sure of yourself when you're not God? You're not in charge. And again, that's repeated in verse 17. That same kind of rebuke in the form of a question is also repeated in verse 17. Or do you feel secure that he who is in heaven will not unleash a torrent of stones upon you? Soon shall you know how my warning is. And here it's interesting because the Nadir is literally a warning, but when these things have come down, they have been punishments for the people who have witnessed them, and a warning for future people or other people who it didn't happen to them, right? So the punishment, for example, of what happened to the people of Pharaoh, for them that's a punishment, but for everybody else coming later on, they can look upon what happened before, and it is a warning for them. This is what happens. This is the consequence of evil behavior, right? It's a warning for everyone else. It's a punishment for the people that it descends upon. This verse is an allusion to the punishment that was sent upon the people of Lut, right? Qawm Lut. It was a torrent of stones, and also upon the Ashab al-Fil, those who, attacked the Kaaba, or they attempted to destroy the Kaaba just 40 years before the beginning of Islam, in the story of Abraha. We talked about this when we did the tafsir of Surah Al-Fil, but they had that punishment. So two punishments are being described. They're not the only ones. We mentioned in the verse from, I think it was Surah Al-Ankabut, that the different punishments that include being engulfed by the earth, or the torrent of stones, or the sayha, for example, which is translated as like a rumble, but it's like the sound that destroyed people, or it's the storms, right? Or it's that the armies of Pharaoh were drowned. So in so many different ways did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punish a people who, it wasn't just their rejection, it was the people who are being described in the Qur'an with these punishments, they had certain qualities in common. Of them was rejection of the truth, fighting the prophets, hoarding wealth, and oppressing people, right? If you could put these four qualities together, you find the response of these four qualities is adab, is punishment in this life, as well as the promise of punishment in the next. And so that the ending of this verse, فَسَتَعْلَمُونَ كَيْفَ النَّذِيرُ, right? Soon shall you know how my warning is significant. The last phrase can also be read as how my warner is. So it's not just the warning of the punishments, but it can also be read as the warner, who is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So the disbelievers will soon know, indicating disbelievers will soon know about his truthfulness and the punishment they deserve for denying him and for fighting him. And this was, as you know, as was mentioned in the verses 8 through 11 that we covered already. So these are, I wouldn't say these are four qualities for punishment. In and of themselves, they are qualities of those who will incur punishment. But together, together these when they occur in those who get the specific punishments that are mentioned in the Qur'an. So they are those who deny the truth when it came to them, right? The truth came, they knew it was the truth, they denied it. The prophets came to them and they fought them. That's the second one. The third is that they had wealth and they hoarded it, right? And the fourth is that they oppressed people. So they had power and they used it to harm other human beings. Those are four qualities of people who get punished in the Quran. And they occur together when you look at the people that are Fir'aun, Haman, Qarun, and in these verses, who's really being spoken to at the time of revelation as the Quraysh who are fighting the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, right? The truth has come and they recognize it. There's a prophet that has come to them and they are fighting him. They have wealth, but they are hoarding it, or there's economic injustice that happens because of it, and they have power and they're using it to oppress people. And specifically in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they use their power to oppress the believers. They oppress people just because they believed in the truth. And so again, it says the last phrase can also be read as how my warner is. The Nadir being not just God's warning, but it could also be his warner, which is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that the disbelievers would know his truthfulness. Soon they would recognize it. And here, the last verse is also significant. وَلَقَدْ كَذَّبَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ فَكَيْفَ كَانَ النَّكِيرُ. So now, it's so, subhanAllah. The verse 16 and 17 talks to you. Even verse 16 talks to you. Do you feel? Am amintum, right? That's to you. Now you go to verse 18 and it doesn't say you, it says them. وَلَقَدْ كَذَّبَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ فَكَيْفَ كَانَ النَّكِيرُ. So in a way, it's almost like turning away from the people who have these qualities of rejecting the truth and saying, you know, and those before them, not even those before you denied, those before them denied in the past as well. And فَكَيْفَ كَانَ نَكِيرٌ, and how was, and the word nakir here is, it's like the inkar, or the rejection that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had for their behavior, right? And so it's used to indicate that the punishment they had in this life, in that which everyone witnessed. So those before them also denied, and what was their end like, right? What did they get from God when God rejected their you know, what was God's reproach of them like when they rejected the truth? So this is we're talking about the inkar of Allah for their bad behavior. So ancient civilizations that were destroyed, and we see their ruins. You can travel through the world and see Petra, right, is a place that you can see like the homes that were made in mountains, civilizations that are lost, people who thought they were safe and secure because of their wealth. And this does come up actually in the verses that deal with traveling through the world, to look at the aqibatul ladina min qablihim. It talks about how the people who came before you, they had bigger buildings, they had greater wealth, they had greater assemblies of people that followed them, and they were also destroyed. So this idea that don't think this world that you've accumulated around yourself can protect you from the punishment of God when it is meant to strike. Now, this message is a reminder for the kuffar of Mecca, those who are fighting the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And Ibn Ajiba mentions that this is not to emphasize that they denied the truth when they knew it, because it says لَقَدْ كَذَّبَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. So it's not just the way the sentence is, it's actually to emphasize that the promise of God is consistent and true and can happen to them too, and will happen to them, right? If they continue their onslaught against the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So again, not just to emphasize their denial, but to emphasize the promise of his response, the response of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In both translations, whether it's how then was the change I wrought or how then was my reproach, they indicate that the punishment will be as severe as what befell previous generations. And the iltifat is what like the turning away basically from going to speaking directly to the audience to turning away and referring to the same people as them is also there's a severity in that way of making the promise that this has happened to those before them, and how was how was the reproach of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala against them. Now it's a short tafsir tonight, we only had these verses, but the reflection from these verses for us in terms of the weekly assignment is I was really looking at how in terms of the different verses of the Qur'an that talk about those who receive the punishment of being swallowed by the earth, or those who receive the punishment of the stones coming down upon them, whether it was Qawm Lut or whether it was the people who came to attack the Kaaba, how there's this cyclical pattern of behavior, right? There's a cyclical pattern of behavior for those who are clinging to do the wrong thing. And there really we mentioned that there's oppressing other human beings, rejecting the truth, hoarding wealth, harming people, right? Fighting prophets. These are like time and time again throughout world history, right? And we see the ruins in the world, and we see the evidences that these events have happened. And even the Quraysh in Mecca had the stories of these events happening. Okay, so people knew that previous nations were destroyed. Great nations of the past were destroyed, and Allah is calling them to remember and to those same civilizations, right, that were completely destroyed because of the oppression that took place, because of the denial of truth and the fighting of prophets. So there's like this behavior results in these consequences consistently, right? So you have oppressive behavior resulting in the same consequences of worldly punishment, and also what's going to happen, the promises of what happens to them in the afterlife in terms of the day of resurrection, and obviously hellfire at the end of it. And calling to mind, like this practice of calling to mind, this behavior leads to these consequences. This type of oppression leads to spiritual consequences, right? Consequences that are, it's God's promise is there with it. And we can even look at it in terms of the modern world. How many times, I mean, there is no tyrant in this world who can escape the justice of God, right? There's no oppressor who can. And sometimes we see situations, even in the modern world, where a tyrant or oppressor had a worldly punishment as well, that everyone saw, that everyone was shocked at. You know, the same person who tortured people in prisons and thought that nobody could be, you know, more powerful than them, what happened to them at the end. And I won't mention names, but the Arab Spring brought about a lot of different kinds of downfalls in the Muslim world. It didn't, I'm not saying it's, you know, it has all ended well yet. We still have countries in the Muslim world who are suffering, but certain tyrants were brought down in very humiliating ways. And it's not that, and I'm not saying that we want people, like we're like these vengeance type people who want to see like humiliation. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm just referring to this idea that oppressive tyrants who are people assumed to be these untouchables, and they assume about themselves that they're completely untouchable, and they think they're safe because of their wealth and their power. In the end, even in this world, even in the modern world, people have been able to witness how they are brought down at the very end, right before they are meant to die and pass. You know, as in terms of what God has done with them in this world, in front of everyone. You know, those are truly signs that we have to reflect on. Now, that being said, for our assignment, it's a little bit different. There's a tyrant that lives within all of us, and that is our egos, our lower selves. And this tyrant oppresses us all the time, or seeks to oppress us all the time. This tyrant wants to take over. They want to be in charge. They want, the ego wants everything, to own all of our faculties and to direct all of our faculties towards its own satisfaction, leaving our souls barren and dry and thirsty and hungry. And this tyrant of our lower self is an oppressive tyrant. And what it does when it tries to oppress us is it involves us in patterns of behavior that result in very similar things. So a person can find themselves, in terms of spiritual growth, making a circle, right? Coming back to the same place they were before, doing the same thing, falling into the same trap, making the same mistake, and being taken advantage of by their egos, by their lower selves. And it's like, if they were to, if you were to write it down, it's almost mathematical. This behavior equals this consequence, equals this spiritual situation, equals this. And then it starts all over again. So I'll give you guys just like an example. Someone who has a problem with overspending, right? They can't put their credit card away. They just spend. And so it lands them in credit card debt. So now they're in debt. Because they're in debt, they now have to borrow money from family and friends because they don't want to be in deeper amounts of debt. When they do this, they feel humiliated. When they feel humiliated, they don't know what to do to try to feel better. But the one thing that somehow makes them feel better is buying more things. And so they go back to their credit cards and they start to, in a state of depression, in a state of feeling bad about doing that, they go back to doing it again. And so they spend more. And they create this cyclical situation where necessarily spending money leads to, or meant spending more money than a person has, leads to being in debt, what leads to having to borrow money or be in a humiliated situation, which leads to a level of despair or depression, which leads to them spending more money. I just came up with that scenario as an example, that we may in ourselves find ourselves in similar situations where there's like a cycle that we enter, and we need to break the cycle, and we need to stop the tyrant, stop the oppressor from taking more than, first off, it shouldn't be taking anything. And the lower self really does want to create these patterns, right? That with almost attached patterns. And so where the assignment for us is to try to interrupt that. We really want to interrupt that. We really want to reflect on what that would be. So the assignment really is to identify for ourselves spiritually, even if we're not there now, a time in the past that we were somewhere where we didn't want to be, right? And it's not an imagined place. Maybe it's something that we've actually gone through. And by a place, I don't mean a physical place. I mean, again, a spiritual place. Remember a time where you were somewhere you didn't want to be. Maybe whether that was, there's different ways of feeling distant from God. Sometimes that way is that the person is in a situation of despair, right? They feel like a loss of hope. Or the person is the opposite of that. There's like ghafla, or just gross negligence. They're just not paying attention to God at all. Whatever it is, just think about it. It could be any number of different causes, but a time where we were spiritually not in the place that we would ever want to be again. And then to look back at the tyrant, which is the lower self, and to see what did it do to get us there. And I'm not referring to other people or our outward circumstances, because outward circumstances, if we have the right spiritual response to even the most terrible circumstances, if we have a good spiritual response to terrible circumstances, right, then we're not in a place that's distant from God. It may be a very painful place, may be very difficult in terms of the pain and suffering of that particular of that tribulation. But in that tribulation, the person is still close to God, is still depending on God, and they're still worshiping Him and obeying Him even in their pain. So I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to a situation where a person is somehow, has fallen from that. I want to say spiritual concern of being close to God. So think about how the ego, the tyrant within, hoarded your faculties. And it could be with a particular incorrect thought. It could be with a habit, an attachment to a negative habit. And again, obviously this needs self-awareness, but think about what it was that it said to you, what was its deception? What was the way that it stole from you in order to put you in a place that you didn't want to be? And keep in also mind that like accomplishments are often places, or when a person has accomplishments, whatever that accomplishment is, spiritual, material, whatever, if they attribute those accomplishments to themselves, this leads obviously to arrogance. And it leads to not only this idea that I am right, but below that is another level of belief, which is might is right, right? That which is outwardly successful is correct and better and has authority over others that is not as outwardly successful. And again, this is a really important underlying lie. Success comes to us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we need to make sure not to be a might is right, or the quote unquote results speak for themselves type people, because the results are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. So after this has been identified, I want everyone to write down what that quality is, or what that particular oppression of the nafs was for yourself, for ourselves, just to write it down. And it could be, like I said, it could be just an incorrect belief. What did the nafs say to you that was a lie that you accepted, and then you acted on it? And that is the thought, or that is the habit, or that is the oppressive quality that for this week we want to work on, and we want to be aware of, we want to catch ourselves in, and we want to protect ourselves from, inshallah. We want to do the opposite of what, again, keeping in mind that the lower self is the oppressor within, it's the tyrant within. And we want to shut this tyrant down, inshallah. And so we will guard against him, guard against her. And that is the assignment. If there's any questions, and you can ask also anonymously as well if you have a question about this. May Allah grant all of us tawfiq on this particular assignment. I know it's not in, it's a little bit more abstract. Normally the assignment is a lot more specific, but this time it's really, every person has to think about it for themselves. And sometimes it's just like, the mistakes are so subtle. The way that the lower self gets to us is so subtle. So as an example, sometimes a person makes a mistake. They think like, oh, when I surrender my affair to Allah, they think they're surrendering. They think they have tawakkul, but in reality, what they did internally was they just gave up, right? They completely gave up. They gave up all hope, and then they find themselves in despair, which is we know despair is a sign that what we did on the inside is wrong, because despair is one of Satan's traps, right? To lose hope is from shaitan. It's not from surrendering our affair to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A proof that we actually surrendered our affair correctly is contentment within, is like tranquility, happiness, peace, not apathy, not numbness, not giving up, not loss of hope, not feeling actually overwhelmed even. Surrender brings a sense of, God's in charge, and I'm at peace with this, and I'm happy, and not necessarily happy with tribulation, but happy with my Creator, and I have hope still in my situation. There's not a loss of hope. There's a private question. At what point in terms of living in non-Muslim countries do Muslims think about hijrah when the country they live in is tending towards debauchery and depravity, knowing no Muslim land is perfect? This is a question about changing our environment. SubhanAllah, it's interesting you asked this question, because someone sent some extremely disturbing content my way of some things that have been publicized. I won't even go into it. It's so vulgar. And this messaging is now can be found in some public schools. This messaging is now found in media that is really accessible to young people. And on one hand, subhanAllah, like the idea of depravity and what is vulgar, and just pushing people towards, a society that seems to be pushing people towards the worst of human conduct. I've talked to teachers about this concept. And like one thing I remember is I lived in a time where I was in college when 9/11 happened. And I was in San Diego, and I had to actually drive past the military base every day on the way to UCSD. So it's like the military base is literally right outside my house. And 9/11 happened, and I felt at the day after 9/11, I felt safe. I felt safe as a Muslim, driving to school. And as much as there was like commotion about who did it and what happened, the country had not yet taken the turn and the same turn it did in like when I came back from travels from studying in Egypt around 2007. One of the summers I came back, and I noticed automatically the climate had changed drastically from just the immediate aftermath of 9/11. And what happened is millions of dollars had been poured into an Islamophobia industry, right? Like there was a whole industry that was built to create bigotry in America against Muslims. That happened years after 9/11 happened. Okay, so this was funded in between. And as bad as it was then, and as bad as the anti-Muslim hate and the bigotry and even some of the really, really painful tragedies that have happened in our community, bigotry and hate was never for some reason, the way I conceptualized bigotry and hate was not like, this country is not safe for me to live in. That's not how I conceptualized it. It was more like, every people who have ever made a place for themselves in this country, for their communities, has gone through a certain degree of discrimination and hate, and they have had to fight for their people and for their place, really, for their rightful place within the society. And I just thought Muslims are going to have to do the same thing. We will have to, you know, participate in the civil rights struggle for our own community, just as other communities have done so. And that didn't make me think like I need to leave this country, you know. As much as these stories that we have heard in the past years have been really painful, that didn't make me think. But some of the media that has been exposed, that I have been exposed to, in terms of what is being done on a social level to almost, it's like to indoctrinate people into really vulgar ways of living, right? That has been the only thing that causes doubt in my mind. Like, I don't know if I want to raise my kids in a place where if they go outside, that there's an actual movement to make this a normal, exposition in society. And I'm not talking about rights, people having rights in terms of not being harmed and having whatever lifestyle they do behind closed doors. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the public depravity and debauchery and just the vulgarity that people want to normalize in terms of at a social level. And I think even this is what it's that kind of messaging, or that kind of the kind of movement that's seeking to normalize that level of vulgarity within society, is what scares the right. It scares people who are not necessarily pro-Trump. They're like, I'm not pro-Trump, but I'm also not that liberal, right? And so they don't know. They're like, in the end, like, what country do I want to live in? They're not pro-Trump. They like don't like Trump, but they're like, I also really don't like that either. And I don't think that's normal. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's sane. So I don't think it's time necessarily to leave the country, though. Our teachers, one of my teachers had mentioned that Muslims have to come together and build alternative spaces, communities, and options for people. Like, and by doing so, we get to light a candle. What they mentioned was even something like, if it gets so bad, then even something like Muslims moving in to the same neighborhoods, right? And having their own schools and having their own, and this is not the same as, but in the past they would talk about full-on integration. And now they're not talking about segregation. They're saying like, no, still go in and engage with society when you have to go for work, engage with society when you have to, but do it by a place of choice, not by a place of things are being forced onto you and your family and your kids, and you feel like you have no choice over it, right? Media and whatnot. So by creating your own alternative community spaces, it's a discussion for another day, I think. But I think it is relevant to the topic because depravity, the ability to, when we talk about like the lower self and the ego and trying to purify ourselves from these vices, and this is like a spiritual commitment that we're seeking to have with God, is this, as to transcend the lower self as much as we humanly can, as much as we possibly can, and doing so out of love for God, and doing so out of love for his law, out of love for what he has revealed to us about the ways that we should live. That is a counterculture practice. That is an alternative lifestyle right now in this country. To be not just religious, but to be spiritual, right? To be not just spiritual, but to be religious. That's an alternative, and it's counterculture. So start with ourselves, and also look to sustainable community building, because one of the purposes of Muslims living in any land is to invite it to that which is good, right? And so it doesn't mean that I'm going to destroy myself and my family and my kids and future generations to try to call people to good, but it means I need to preserve the good that we are trying to do within ourselves, so that I can go out and invite people to it as well. It's a great question for a discussion, inshallah, for another day, because we're out of time. We're going to end, inshallah, with dua. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضى، واجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء، وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى، علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم آمين يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds. Peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family and companions and followers. O God, give us success to attain what you love and are pleased with. Make us among your felicitous servants. Allow us to die on the statement of guidance. Teach us what will benefit us and give us success to act upon what you taught us. Make that in which we are engaged pure and devoted to your noble face. Ameen, O Lord of the worlds. O God, make this gathering of ours a gathering enveloped in mercy, and our parting thereafter a parting of our sins purged and forgiven, not one of us wretched or deprived. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and upon his noble family and followers and companions. Ameen. Thank you all for joining. Alhamdulillah. Thank you guys. Thank you, MSA West in the house. Alhamdulillah. Always good to see you all. And inshallah, I'll be seeing you guys this week. And we are so, so happy to have you guys. Alhamdulillah. Have a wonderful night. Remember the assignment. Remember the assignment and try it, inshallah, this week. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
وعليكم السلام جزاك الله خير.